Okay, so we're in lesson 9, page 1, opening consciousness to truth. We are tonight going to start with a short period of meditation, but it will be a different meditation than we've had before, in that instead of taking the word into consciousness and pondering it, this time we will just open consciousness and listen. We will just open consciousness for that inflow. We can visualize it this way, using the illustration of Niagara Falls and Lake Erie. We will suppose here that I am Niagara Falls, and in and of myself, I'm continuously using up myself so that ultimately there would be nothing left, especially in 3 or 4 years, or 10 or 20. Instead of that, let this be with the knowledge that behind me, as Niagara Falls, there is Lake Erie. We will suppose here that I am Niagara Falls, and in and of myself, I am continually, let me begin with that last paragraph again. We can visualize it this way, using the illustration of Niagara Falls and Lake Erie. We will suppose here that I'm Niagara Falls, and in and of myself, I'm continuously using up myself so that ultimately there would be nothing left, especially in 3 or 4 years, or 10 or 20. Instead of that, let this be with the knowledge that behind me, as Niagara Falls, there is Lake Erie. As a matter of fact, actually, there is no Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is only a name given to Lake Erie at one corner of it, where it goes over the falls. Now, so with us, we call ourselves man, but actually we aren't. We are God. But that which is visible of us here is God, where God becomes visible, where God comes to it. God comes to a focus, you may say, in an individual yet infinite manner. In other words, it's like realizing that Niagara Falls and Lake Erie are not two, but one. And all that Lake Erie is, of course, Niagara is. All that Lake Erie has, Niagara has. But Lake Erie is continuously pouring itself forth as Niagara. So with us, God is forever pouring himself forth as individual you and me. There's really no place where God ends and man begins. I and the Father are one, and that is the meaning of this. There's no place where you can separate us and say, here's God and here's man. Any more than you can say that up to there is Lake Erie and from here on is Niagara Falls. There is no such place in the whole watershed. Now, since it's true that all of the Godhead is pouring itself forth as individual you and me, the only reason for any lack in our experience, whether it is lack of health or lack of wealth or a lack of opportunity or a lack of any form, is the fact that we have come to believe that this is all there is of us, that this is our being, instead of which we merely are that place through which all of God is pouring forth. Now, to correct that mistake, to overcome that belief of separation, there's only one thing necessary. That is that our consciousness be open at all times for the inflow, Lake Erie, God, to flow out as me or as you. This work is a conscious work. It's not one in which you can just sit around and say, well, I'll let God do it. There comes a time when you do say, I'm just letting God do it. And the statement is all right. But at this particular stage, if we were to say, oh, let God do it, we would be thinking of something separate and apart from our own being, as if it were going to do something for us. Whereas the attitude is a very scientific one. Let God do it. That attitude at this moment could be so badly mistaken that we would lose our whole path through blind faith. Now let us open our consciousness then and take the attitude of Samuel. Speak, Father, thy servant heareth. Or Mrs. Eddy's hymn, I will listen for thy voice. Or the Bible, listening to the still small voice, or the still, or be still and know that I is God, and that the I is pouring itself forth as the individual man. The object then of this meditation will be, remember our basic statement. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all things will be added. Not to demonstrate a single thing, a single person, or a single condition. We are just going to open consciousness in the realization that Lake Erie is flowing right across that place called Niagara Falls. That it's still Lake Erie appearing as Niagara Falls, and actually that God is pouring himself forth as Joel Goldsmith. And there's no place that God ends and the man begins. There's no place where God ends and you begin. It is all one continuous flow. After we've done that, we are going to make this a continuous thing. There's going to be no 2 a day about this. From this point on, after we meditate tonight, we are going to open our consciousness to the truth that I and the Father are one. Especially after we get into bed, and especially before we get out of bed in the morning. And then as many hours through the through the day as we can. We are going to remember, I and the Father are one, and that this Lake Erie is pouring itself forth as me. Even if we do not sit down to meditate, we shall for a second or a minute open our consciousness to the realization of this relationship between God, invisible, infinite, and ourselves, the visible manifestation of the infinite invisible. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. And we are going to keep our consciousness stayed on God from now through the rest of time. Not in any foolish, stupid way, but in just this way of every hour at least opening our ears or just looking up toward the skies, which will be our recognition of the infinitude of God pouring forth as individual me. A month from now, you will look in the mirror and you won't know yourself. As you sit in meditation, you will notice a change taking place in your system within. For one thing, as your breathing slows down, and it will, and your thoughts race less and less, and finally cease, you will probably find that your diaphragm will go in and your chest come out, much like an athlete's figure. It just seems to draw itself in at the waist, and the chest comes up and gives you that pose. Probably that is the normal position of the body anyway. It does happen, and it brings a beautiful sense of peace with it. Your ideal meditation comes in at that point because from there on, you do not think a single thought. The rhythm of the universe is taking possession of you. You may not move, but you feel that you are in tune. You feel there's a rhythm. You feel there's a harmony of being and of mental peace. It is more than a mental peace. It is a spiritual peace which settles upon you. And you could really sit there for many, many minutes in that attitude. Do not let that become the attitude of falling asleep. Don't let it become an attitude of mental laziness, because this that I am describing is the opposite of that. What I am describing is a spirit of alertness in which, however, you do no thinking. You just seem to rest back in peace and harmony, but become receptive to impartation from within. You will find many passages in the Bible describing that beautiful peace that comes when we feel held by the everlasting arms, when the soul is at rest, when the soul senses are at rest. Remember, it's not to be mental stagnation. It is not to be falling asleep. It is a wonderful alertness, yet containing the feel of the peace that passes passive understanding. We feel the joy of being without any external reason for that joy. It is an inner attitude. It is an inner attunement. Ultimately, you will do every bit of your healing work in that way. Ultimately, you will come to that place where you will not take a single thought when you sit down to help anyone or even to help yourself. You will sit back. You will remind yourself, of course, that there is no place where Lake Erie ends and Niagara Falls begins. No place where God ends and you begin. All of the Godhead is pouring forth as me. All that the Father hath is mine. All of the wisdom, all of the knowledge, all that I need to know is omnipresent as my very own consciousness. With a few little reminders like that, and speak, Father, for thy servant heareth. Here am I, waiting for this still small voice. Until gradually that sense of peace comes and you just stay there in that peace until this click comes, and then you're through. You will know that the patient has either had a healing or has felt a great sense of relief or freedom, or that the situation has been met in some way. If you are called on to do it over again and over again, it is still the same thing. Finding the center of your being, finding your oneness with the eternal, feeling the complete rhythm of this universe and of yourself in tune with it. Now, there is a spiritual law underlying that. There is a spiritual law underlying this sense of peace or meditation in which no thought takes place, no argument, no treatment, just the conscious awareness of God's presence. It's another illustration of how the Bible is full of tremendous laws that we just use as quotations. Resist not evil. Have you ever heard about that one? Oh, yes, there is one of the most powerful laws in the entire Bible. Resist not evil. Why? It's not real. And if you resist it, you make it real. What a battle you had then. Resist not evil in the face of any erroneous picture, in the face of any discord. Instead of denying it, instead of saying it isn't happening, how foolish, for it is happening out in that picture. Let's not argue. Let's not fight it. Let's not resist it at all, but just sit back and say, I wonder how real you could be. Resist not evil. Is this the acme of spiritual healing? It enables you to face any situation in the world and almost say, so what? You see, since our premise is that all action is mind action and God is the only mind, everything that is appearing to you is the activity of God. So that what we are doing now is not overcoming error, but rightly interpreting that picture before us. Inasmuch as it is foolish for us to sit and look at a sin or disease and say, you are God's perfect image. I really think that is stretching it a little too far. Still, it is quite in order to say, how about interpreting this for me and letting me see it as it is? It is perfectly all right to say that to God. No resistance there, you see. No acknowledgement that it is an error to be overcome. No acknowledgement that there is a sinner to be reformed. No acknowledgement that there is a lack or limitation that must be met. Just that here is somebody talking in Sanskrit and the only interpreter is God. So you have to let God interpret this hodgepodge or black print before you. You see, in spiritual healing, there is no mental action. There is no conscious thought taking. There's no conscious affirming or denying. There is more of the sense that inasmuch as the reality of this is of and in God, I am going to let God interpret it for me. You can take that same attitude when you're reading a book or reading the Bible or listening to a lecture or to a teacher. You can sit back there too and say, I'm not so much interested in what you're saying as in how God is going to interpret it to me. And then you sit back quietly and not use the thing up in the head called brain. You let your state of receptivity take in what is being said or read, and then you let the infinite within you translate it for you. How many here have actually done, say, 1 month of this, of work on the quotation, resist not evil? You must know it is the law of God, or it wouldn't be in that book the way it is. We just say, I don't understand that. We somehow get the idea that if we're not to resist evil, we will succumb to temptation. The first thing we know, we think we will be stealing or committing adultery. This is not so. Let us resist not evil, because evil isn't anything or person. It is a misinterpretation of some activity of God's, since God is literally all. Since there is no action apart from mind action, since there is no activity apart from eternal life, when looking at what the world calls death, we are actually witnessing eternal life in action. That is the only way Jesus could raise anyone from the dead. That is the only way a practitioner can raise the dying back to life. Not by saying, you are dying, but I'm going to raise you back to life, but by recognizing that there is nothing going on here but the activity of mind, that he must just sit in peace and quiet until God, the inner interpreter of his being, interprets it for him. You see, we don't do the interpreting. There's some of that metaphysical work that I sometimes get a little bit too angry about, where we are supposed to turn around and say, it isn't true, it isn't real, or all this is nonsense. What are we saying it for if it isn't? We believe it is, or we wouldn't be saying it isn't. I never knew of a millionaire who went around saying, I'm rich and I know it. That is usually done by the fellow who isn't rich and who's trying to hypnotize himself into the belief that he is. You don't find many healthy people going around saying, I am well, I am God's perfect child. And you don't actually find nicely employed people saying, God is my employer. No, they have the actual consciousness of it. They don't have to go around deluding themselves with a lot of statements that they hope to make come true. Rather, when you're faced with what appears to your sense to be evil, be honest about it and say, this is a nasty looking picture. I don't like it. Be sure that you do not make empty denials and statements that you wish were true. You will find that you have a lot more respect for your own metaphysics when you're making statements that you yourself believe, when you do not go around making a lot of statements which in the back of your mind you do not believe and also wish were true. All of that has been stepping stones. But for a lot of people, it's been stepping stones to the grave or to an institution or to an accident. For some people who were wise enough to see that it was just a temporary measure out of which they had to develop, it really was a stepping stone into something better. You see, in this field, like in everything else, we're up against the fact that the average person isn't an independent thinker. He's more apt to be a blotting paper and willing just to absorb what somebody says or somebody writes. For that reason, you'll hear students make all the ridiculous statements found in print, and how many of those there are. From now on, let us say, from now on, I'm going to at least to be honest, I am not going around saying I am rich if I'm hungry or well if I'm sick. From now on, I will make the open admission that I feel terrible and I'm hungry. But I know right well there is a right interpretation to this thing. There is a right answer, and I'm going to sit down and meditate and let God get back to me on the beam. Get me back on the beam. It's all right if you catch this idea that because the activity of mind is all there is, that even that which is appearing to be a discord is some part of God's allness. It is perfectly all right to assure yourself or reassure yourself with, wait, I don't have to believe this picture, since I do know that in the nature of reality, all is God. So now let me sit back and realize it. Let me receive the divine impartation that will dispel the illusion. Let me tell you one great truth, that no amount of this kind of work up here in the head is going to heal your disease or your lack. You might as well make up your mind to that right here and now, that mental power is not Christ power. Christ's power is gentleness and peace and all-knowing and confidence and understanding. It has nothing to do with battling. I love the passage in that little book, Grace, that we read here Saturday, and which said something to the effect that the nature of the Christ knows no battle. There too, the Bible shows us that stand you still and see the salvation of the Lord. The battle is not yours, but God's. So you see, there is no need for all this mental battling. We who have come to this place right here are here because we are ready to give up our mental processes. That is what has drawn us here together. We are in one place and of one mind, and nobody pulled us in. We came here through some divine urge within our own being, and we wouldn't be here if we weren't ready. I can assure you of that. Let us, even while we are reviewing these notes, even while we are finding wonderful statements to buoy us up at times, let us really know that these are just temporary stopgaps. They are just reminders to sit back and let God, let the infinite intelligence of your being interpret this thing to you. I said before that the earth is really heaven, only seen through finite sense, seen through a glass darkly. Well, inasmuch as with your eyes you will never see it any other way than that, why not acknowledge it and sit back with your eyes closed and let your spiritual sense reveal the harmony of being to you? Here again, I come to a very important point. It isn't our human saying that God is all that brings out a demonstration for you. There must be the development of the spiritual sense, what I call soul sense, so that you perceive that which is not visible or tangible to the five senses. You perceive it through your inner soul sense. Oh, in a measure, you catch a glimpse of that when you have the faculty of looking at a person and saying, that's an honest person, or I would not trust that person. How do you know? You don't know that with your brain. Some little inner thing shows you all of that. The same thing happens when you really are watchful in your reading. You should have no difficulty in recognizing a statement that comes right out of the consciousness of truth, and one that is someone's human opinion or somebody's quotation of somebody else without having had any consciousness of it. Something within you should respond and say, that is true, or I would not want to bother with this kind of statement. Something within you does it. That something is the soul sense. Remember, we said that hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, and smelling are our concepts of the spiritual activity of consciousness. Therefore, the five physical senses represent our misconception of the real soul faculty. Now, we all have soul faculty. There would not be one of us spending human time on divine spiritual subjects if this were not so, for it would be a waste of time to material sense. Only to us, it is not a waste of time. It is an investment. But to the material sense, all of this would be a waste of time. We wouldn't be here but for the fact that we have some measure of spiritual consciousness. We have some measure of spiritual sense. It is that measure. It is that spiritual sense that makes you enjoy this and makes me enjoy it. It is that spirit. It is not our human intellect. Our intellect would rebel at this. I know too many people with fine human intellects, and I know how they would rebel, and you do too. No, you must have some measure of developed spiritual sense to be able to sit and listen or read for very long on these metaphysical subjects. What I mean to be saying is that we must increase the measure of our soul sense, of our spiritual sense, and we must do that by looking at any appearance and letting God translate it into the spiritual significance, into its spiritual significance. When, as sometimes happens, we have forevision, foresight, or catch a glimpse of some scene or event which has not happened yet, but which usually happens the next day or the next week or the next month, inasmuch as we are recognizing God as the only mind, we know well that what is coming to us is the misinterpretation of the activity of the divine mind. We must understand it can be so and immediately declare that this is only the finite human sense of some spiritual activity. And then if you want, sit for a few moments and let the divine mind reinterpret that vision. There was a time when I did not know how to do this, and I had some very unpleasant experiences. I was just a youngster. My father was a European traveler and spent much of his time over there. I went to my mother one day and said, "Mom, something's wrong in Europe. Something's wrong with Pop." There wasn't anything we could do about it because we all knew about it because all we knew was that he had just landed in England. But the next day, we had a cable from him that he was on his way between two stations in London to catch the Nottingham Express, and for the first time in 100 trips, he missed his train. That was when the Nottingham Express was wrecked and everyone aboard was killed, 101 people. It just happened that I had nothing to do with the fact that he missed the train. My vision did not help because I did not know how to handle it. A short time after that, I said to my mother, "There's a railroad wreck in Connecticut." This was verified in the paper that night. I still didn't know how to handle it. Later on, I always caught a certain signal when someone was about to pass on. Someone I knew, someone in the family, a close friend. I never knew or understood anything about it, but always the passing came after that signal. It was only after I learned in science how to reverse these things that I learned how, once the signal came, to reverse it and prevent its happening. This happened once in the Middle West when a woman came up to me in a department store and asked the buyer to whom I was talking to introduce her. She told me that one of my family close to me would die that week, and it would be from either heart disease or an automobile accident, and she wasn't quite sure which. At that time, I was a student of science, and I know how to avert this. I got busy right there and then in the realization God was the only presence and the only power, and that the only activity that could take place was the activity of mind, and all this was merely like a sin or disease. It was just the negative appearance and just the reverse of that which was actually happening. That member of my family was in an automobile a few days later, going around a curve, went up on 2 wheels and then came back on 4 again. That was the end of that. There was no death that time. Soon after that, I was in the practice, and again, every time some patient was in danger, I got that signal. From then on, I knew how to avert the danger or the death. I knew that all of these pictures, we call them premonitions, were misinterpretations of divine activity. You must turn to your divine mind, your infinite intelligence, and realize that no picture appears before you except that picture which is painted by the hand of the divine and is good. If there is any other picture appearing, it's merely the misinterpretation of that divine activity. Keep up your work until you get the feeling that you do this with a healing. Even with a good picture, do the same. You don't want anything but divinity itself. Otherwise, if you were a practitioner, all you would want would be that your patient become well, or you might get him well today and find that something else occurs tomorrow. No, we don't want physical health. I don't mean that we unwant it. I just mean that it's not the object of our work. Just because a patient says, I have a fever and my body seems all right, that isn't our work. Our work, even then, is to realize that even the appearance of physical health is only a misinterpretation of the divine health, which is life eternal. That goes back to the new horizons in the book, Infinite Way. Every human picture is mesmeric suggestion. Every human picture is a finite representation of the infinite. Even the good ones. Even the good ones. Ask some of your millionaires whether they think it's so good to be a millionaire. Ask some of the healthy people whether they are happy or contented. No, every human picture, we are here because we have risen to that point where we are not satisfied just through some kind of process to make sick people well. That's not the end and the object of our work. The end and object of our work is to reverse the whole human picture so that we can see you as divinely as you are, you divine means eternal and immortal. Any picture that is presented to the sight, good or bad, should have the immediate recognition that God is the author and the creator. It is infinitely good, and what is appearing finitely is but the false interpretation of that infinite, beautiful picture, which you can't see with your physical eyes, but which internally you can feel with your spiritual sense. Thank you, John.